My name is Reese Alden, and I was the only human at Vashtar Academy. Everyone else came from tall, strong, ancient species who had been part of the compact for thousands of years. I was new. My whole species was new. We had joined only 11 years earlier, and most people in the academy did not think much of us. They thought we were slow, weak, and easy to ignore. I heard this almost every day, in different words, from different people. I never argued back. I just listened, and I waited. The academy was built for bodies much bigger than mine. The ceilings were high, the chairs were wide, and the doorways were made for shoulders twice the size of my own. I often felt small there, not just in size, but in the way people looked at me. Nobody said cruel things to hurt me on purpose. They simply believed I did not belong, and they said so openly, the way people talk about weather or lunch. Torek Vaughn was the loudest of them. He was a Corveth, a species built over hundreds of generations for strength and quick reactions. He was nearly 7 feet tall, calm, confident, and used to being right. One morning, in front of the whole class, he said, "The small one wants to fly a warship. Command must enjoy taking chances." Several cadets laughed. I did not laugh, but I did not feel angry either. I simply opened my notebook and kept writing. That was my method the entire time I was at the academy. While other cadets trained their bodies and their reflexes, I trained my mind. I was not the fastest. I was not the strongest. But I noticed things. I paid attention to patterns, to small details, to old records that nobody else bothered to read. I spent my free hours in the archive room, going through old reports from past missions, some of them so old that the pages barely opened without cracking. Humans did not have claws, natural armor, or any special powers. What we had was something else, something the compact had not fully understood yet. For thousands of years, before we ever reached the stars, humans had faced dangers far stronger than ourselves. We learned to survive not through strength, but through thinking ahead, working together, and changing our plans quickly when something went wrong. It was a quiet kind of skill, one that did not show up easily in training scores. At the academy, my scores were only average. I never stood out in simulations. My flying was steady but never fast. My scores were nothing special. The instructors sometimes looked at me with a mix of curiosity and doubt, unsure why I had been accepted at all. I did not blame them. On paper, I looked ordinary at best. But I kept reading. Late at night, when most cadets were resting or socializing, I sat alone with old training logs and reports from long-finished missions. Some of these records were so old that nobody used them for lessons anymore. I found them fascinating. I read about strange enemy formations, unusual signals, and old mistakes that cost people dearly. Nobody assigned me to read these. I simply wanted to understand what a real difficult moment might look like, since simulations never fully prepared anyone for something unexpected. The final test at the academy was supposed to be a normal simulation, something all of us had done many times already. We expected clean numbers, calm feedback, and a quiet evening afterward. Instead, something went very wrong, almost as soon as it began. 9 minutes into the exercise, real drones appeared near the Academy's outer defense system. At first, everyone assumed it was part of the test, a clever addition by the instructors. But then, alarms rang differently than usual. Red lights blinked in a pattern we had never practiced, and it became clear something outside the plan had happened. Someone had used the busy moment of the exam to slip past the station's defenses. The instructors' emergency codes did not respond. Many senior staff members were away at the time, checking equipment on another ship. For several tense minutes, 40 cadets and one half-repaired training ship stood as the only defense between the drones and the heart of the station. Torek took charge immediately, the way he always did. He was confident, quick, and used to leading. He called out the standard formation, the one we had learned since our first year. All ships close together, shields facing outward, strength meeting strength directly. It was the correct answer for every simulation we had trained on all year. But this was not a simulation anymore, and I realized something the moment I saw the drone's movement pattern. It matched something I had read only weeks earlier, buried deep in an old report about a difficult incident from years ago. Those drones had not been true attackers. They had been used to trick defenders into forming a tight group, so that a second, more serious threat could slip through the gap that such a formation always left behind. I understood the danger. But I also understood how unlikely anyone was to trust me in that moment. I was the quiet cadet who read old files instead of training reflexes. Still, I could not stay silent while everyone repeated a mistake I recognized. "Break the formation," I said over the communication channel. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Nobody responded right away. I did not expect them to. So instead of repeating myself and hoping for the best, I made a decision on my own. I unlocked a safety setting on my ship's controls, something I had only ever read about doing in old records, never actually tried myself. Then I steered my ship sideways, away from the group, into open space that suddenly felt far too big and far too quiet. It looked like a mistake. It looked like exactly the kind of unpredictable, careless move people expected from me. But it was not careless. It was based on everything I had studied. As soon as I moved, the drones shifted their attention toward the open space I had created, exactly the way the old records had described. For a few important seconds, the real threat behind them had nowhere left to hide. I fired everything my small ship had, which was not very much compared to the others, but it did not need to be much. I was not trying to defeat the danger by myself. I only needed to expose it long enough for the rest of my classmates to see the trap and respond properly. Torek saw it. Whatever else could be said about him, he was quick to understand a new situation once he saw proof of it. Within seconds, he called out a new formation, one that closed the gap I had created and protected the space I had left open. The threat that had been designed to take advantage of human caution instead ran directly into 40 cadets who had just learned, in real time, why the quiet cadet spent so much time buried in old records instead of training reflexes. We held our position until the station's main defense systems finally came back online. Nobody was seriously hurt. The drones were pushed back, the danger passed, and slowly, carefully, calm returned to the training area. The debrief that followed was quieter than usual. Nobody joked. Nobody complained. People simply looked at each other differently than they had that morning. Later that night, I found myself alone in the docking area, running a hand along the side of my ship, checking that it was truly whole and undamaged. I had not expected anyone to join me, but after a while, Torek walked in. He did not speak right away. He simply stood there, looking at the ship as if trying to understand something he had missed before. "You knew," he finally said. It was not really a question. "I read," I answered simply. "That's all it ever was. You have the reflexes, the training, the instincts built over generations. I only had the patience to notice a pattern that nobody else bothered to look for." He stayed quiet for a long moment, longer than felt natural for someone usually so confident and quick to speak. Species like his were built around clear hierarchies, around knowing exactly where they stood and why. Standing there, unsure of exactly what to say, seemed to cost him more effort than any physical challenge ever had. "They call your kind fragile," he said at last. "We are," I admitted, "but we don't stay easy to predict for very long." He did not laugh, but something in the way he stood seemed to relax slightly, like a fact he had been holding the wrong way had finally settled properly into place. He did not apologize, not directly, because that was not really his way. But the next morning, when the list for advanced tactics training was posted, my name appeared first, nominated by him. After that day, nobody at the academy mocked me anymore, at least not the way they used to. The teasing stopped, replaced slowly by something closer to curiosity. Cadets who once ignored me began stopping by, asking quiet questions about what I had been reading, what other old records I had studied, what patterns I noticed that others usually missed. I did not become the strongest cadet at the academy. I did not suddenly gain reflexes like Torek's, or the raw physical power of the Braxy heavy-frame cadets who trained beside us. That part of me never changed. What changed was how people understood what I brought to the group. They began to see that strength came in different forms, and that patience, careful observation, and a willingness to try something unusual when everyone else followed the same old plan could matter just as much as speed or power. Looking back, I think that day taught all of us something important, not just about human cadets, but about how easily assumptions can form when people only measure others using their own idea of strength. Torek's people valued speed and instinct, built through countless generations of careful training. My people valued something quieter, something built through struggle, patience, and creative thinking, developed over a much shorter but very difficult history. Neither approach was wrong. Neither was complete on its own. Together, though, they filled in each other's gaps in ways that made all of us stronger. The academy eventually returned to its normal routine, filled with new lessons, new simulations, and new challenges. But something had shifted quietly beneath the surface. Cadets who once dismissed me now watched carefully whenever I studied old records, curious about what small detail I might notice next. Even instructors, who once viewed my performance as simply average, began paying closer attention to how I approached problems differently than most cadets. I never expected to prove anything that day. I was not trying to show off, or to win anyone's respect through some dramatic gesture. I only wanted to prevent a mistake I recognized, based on quiet hours spent reading records nobody else cared to open. In the end, that quiet effort mattered far more than I expected. Humanity was still new to the wider compact, still learning our place among species who had been exploring the stars long before we even understood the size of our own galaxy. We were smaller, physically weaker, and far less experienced in many ways, but we carried with us something valuable, something shaped by countless generations of facing danger, without any natural advantage beyond our own minds, and our determination to adapt. That lesson, I think, stayed with everyone who was there that day, long after the drones were gone and the station returned to calm. It was not a lesson about being the strongest or the fastest. It was a lesson about paying attention, staying patient, and trusting quiet preparation, even when nobody else seems to notice its value. From that day forward, whenever new cadets arrived at the academy and made quick judgments based on size or strength alone, someone would eventually mention the story of the small, quiet human cadet who once noticed something everyone else had missed, simply because they had taken the time to look closely enough to see it.